All right, this is part 2, and we're going to continue talking about the different types of disciplines that influence organizational behavior. So social psychology is looking at how one person influences another. For those of you that might be interested in longitudinal effects of a superintendent in a school district, longitudinal effects of a principal, how a principal was able to implement or integrate change, social psychology might be the discipline you look at. When I talk about social psychology, I try to think about the TV show Survivor, because that's probably the best, most pertinent example of what social psychology is and even what it looks like. So anthropology is how human beings are and how they interact, and how they interact with their culture, and how their beliefs and their own personal practices can influence larger, more holistic things. So I say that anthropology works on cultures and environments. Most studies are qualitative. Ethnographies are considered to be under the barrier of anthropology. Know the difference between when you're writing, because this is important. If you're writing as an insider, a member of the culture, you're writing as an emic. If you're writing as an outsider, you're writing as an etic. That does matter because it does validate where your research stands and who necessarily your research is supposed to be designed for. So workforce diversity, I mentioned this, and I think it's important because our book says that 47% of the workforce is women, and by 2014, 55% and older will make up, 55 years of age and older will make up 20% of the workforce. I think this is scarier because you have to have the right people in place who can replace them. Managing older employees is going to be the toughest thing that all of you have to do, because a lot of them are going to be set in their ways and they already know what they've done and how that interacts with the organization. I do want to caution you on something. Even though 47% of the workplace is women, we've talked in here a little bit about gender already. I want to stress the idea and the notion that when we're talking about gender in relation to education, we currently have more women in middle management than we do men. So when people are saying, I want to do a study on gender equality, and a lot of people do decide to do that, I caution you heavily against it unless you're looking at gender at central office, because superintendents and high school principals even, there's a lot more men than women, but considering we have quadrupled the elementary schools in the United States than we do high schools or middle schools, and those are predominantly run by women, we do have women in management. So you have to be careful if you're going to say we don't have enough women in management, but we have women in management in targeted areas, so quantity might not be the issue, it's more salary than anything else. So I believe that you can study sociology in four manners. You can look at age, race, class, and gender. My writings revolve around what I think are the most prevalent in our society. Number one being age, because I'm a firm believer in succession planning. You have to know who's going to replace the people that are close to retirement. And number two is class, because I think social class matters when you're talking about district mobility, even employee mobility. And I think those are the ones that are most prevalent in our society and the ones that impact us the most as educators. So we'll look in depth at generational issues with organizational behavior, and we'll talk about some of these a little bit more later on in the course. But I want to tell you, things that are important, like flex time. Flex time is sort of this notion of letting employees be able to determine when they come in and when they leave, which in schools you might not necessarily be able to do. But you have teachers sometimes who would rather stay later than get there earlier. And if you have the opportunity to give them autonomy to do that, that's not a bad thing. It gives them freedom and it keeps their job satisfaction high. The disadvantage of that is you end up being the one that manages both perspectives. Occasionally you will have issues involving two working parents. That can create a problem for childcare. And organizationally, some people might find that it's more beneficial to stay home than pay for the increasing cost of childcare in the United States. And most people do work close to 50-hour a week work weeks, and that's something that you should be aware of, because once again, it makes it difficult to have a family and maintain that family as well. So organizational behavior, I'm going to give you some textbook stuff. that I'm going to go through quickly. You can look at this on your own. It's social scientific. It looks for human behavior in social and cultural settings to improve organizations. So it's social, but it's scientific. It's human behavior looking at culture, but it's ultimately to improve. Social scientific would indicate to me that it would be a mixed methods type of study. And that's important. If you're doing an org study, you want mixed methods. Why does it matter? Leadership and administration means working with other people. This is a human perspective in a human field, so you have to work with others in order to be successful. If you don't have a theory of practice and you only use what you think is best, that's great, but the theory that you think is the best theory might not be the best theory for the organization. You have to know the contributions of the people that came before us, and that can help us make strategic and tactical decisions that will help us improve. So public administration began under Woodrow Wilson. He said that we need to study public administration and how it works, and it led to more look at profit maximization than anything else. Administration was really done for university treatment, really to show that there were major inequities between the types of degrees people were getting and what they were earning. So that was one of the reasons of the essay and sort of what it stood for. The Industrial Revolution really said that, we have to have scientific management, which said that, we need to have clear descriptions on the jobs that people were doing. We need to select people systematically, right fit. We have to have a clear division of responsibility between management and workers. Management knows what the workers are supposed to be doing, but then management supervises them. And then management sets the objectives and workers have to do them. So how do we relate these to education? Think about it. You're going to be doing a lot of leadership where you give people specific jobs that they're supposed to do. Scientific methods, you need to make the right hires when you're able to make the right hires. Division of responsibility between management and workers, equally important. Leaders have to respect you, but you have to give them autonomy when they need it as well. Management sets the objectives, but workers try to cooperate to achieve them when possible. So, this would lead to things like time studies. Jim Spillane, we'll talk about him a little bit more in this class. Discipline on the job, who's responsible for being in charge and who ultimately makes the decision. If we have tasks with minimal interpersonal contact, we have to look at what that looks like and what that can do to morale. And then, should incentive pay be used? And if so, what does incentive pay look like organizationally? So, organizational theory really came out of the work of Henri Fayol, who was French, and looked at workers as extensions of, workers as extensions of the manager, meaning the manager makes the decisions and the workers need to follow and support what the manager is doing. There were different elements in how managers should be and what they should look at, and it kind of led to what the functions need to be. And he came up with 5 that you can easily relate to, and we've already talked about some of these. Planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling. I would argue that controlling is evaluating and commanding is now leading. Commanding is too not nice of a word that we wouldn't be able to use it. So Weber came up with bureaucracy and bureaucratic organizational theory that led to the 6 foundations of bureaucratic organization theory, which I think are all important, to at least look at. Number 1 is the division of labor based on functional specialization. Definitely relates to schools. Are you teaching what you're certified to teach? Is there a hierarchy? Do you know who the principal is? Do you know who you get specific materials for? Are there rules giving you rights and duties that you have that are either fair, or even if they're not fair, clearly explained to you? Is there a handbook? Is there a guide that tells you what happens if a situation occurs? Is there impersonality in your interpersonal relations? Do you handle them in a fair and equitable manner that are balanced? And do you actually promote people based only on technical competence? I can see positives with that, but I can also see negatives as well, and you can determine that on your own. So classical organizational theory really came, it started with this work of Callahan, but I would argue Elwood Cubberley was more famous for it in writing, schools or factories. And, the students are raw materials, and they have to be shaped into a product that helps meet the demands of what somebody is supposed to be in their real life. And I think that's a great description and a great way to look at it. So one of the first people that studied what superintendents do was Fred Ayer. He focused on university programs that dealt with management tasks for superintendents. And that was a good thing, because it showed what a superintendent need to do to manage and lead. Then it sort of moved more into functionalizing it, which came from later work from Gulick and Erwick, and that was more or less the concept of formal organizational charts. I myself have not done work on the history of the superintendent. I don't know much about it, but all of my work has been on the history of how universities have trained principals and what principals know, but a lot of the same concepts can be applied to that as well. Then Mary Parker Follett really was one of the most important ones in school, because they looked at the speakership of the U.S. House and looked at how homeless boys in Boston were and how business executives helped to contribute to them. Management, in her eyes, was viewed socially. Whatever the situation was at the time, that's how managers responded, and said that we need to be more situational in our management. I think that's a good thing. Situational management isn't necessarily bad. You're going to have responsibilities and tasks that are pushed to the side when you have to respond to something that's certainly more pressing. So what are the principles of sound administration? Direct contact of responsible people. It should be coordinated in early stages as much as possible. It has to relate to all factors in the situation, and it has to be continuing. So then we move on to the human relations movement. This was the work of Elton Mayo, really noting that individuals that understand what's going on at all dimensions of the organization, knowing the idea behind maybe cross-training within an organization, they're more committed, and then they're thus more likely to be productive. I would argue that this has good translations to school systems as well, because our school systems are, of the human approach and the human relations approach. So then, Western Electric was the study that was looked at, really to say what are the different functions of organizations and what are they responsible for doing. It's morale, group dynamics, democratic supervisions, personnel relations, and motivation. These are all going to be talked about in later chapters in the class, but just kind of know that they came out of work in the 1920s, so it's a fairly new concept still. So then Bales looked at how individuals interact with groups, really looking at what does task orientation and initiating structure mean. Does the group actually focus on completing tasks? And is there a structure as to how tasks are going to be completed? And is there somebody who actually cares about people and is focused on relationships? In an ideal world, if you have to pick one or the other, task orientation is going to be more productive, but a good manager is somebody who can do both and have different people in the groups who can do both. So, leadership needs good involvement and interaction with leaders to subordinates. Leaders have to have the ability to leave and be willing to accept responsibility. They don't have to be there constantly, but if something goes wrong, they can put it on something else. Prior to the 1980s, the human relations movement had little effect on superintendents. It was more related to principals. ASCD, it really looked at kind of what what superintendents did in supervision practice. And that's one of the organizations you can write for and design a proposal in this class. So the paradox of organizational structure, a couple of final thoughts here. Organizations are not tangible concrete objects. They're constantly changing. They're what we think they are and what others think they are because of how dynamic they are. So that's it for Chapter 3. I hope you got something out of this chapter, and I hope this was pertinent material as you continue looking on and developing who you are organizationally. Thank you.